Alright, I have not recalled my launching off point particle. I have the idea starting point from some drafting, just some discussion earlier today, and I made notes of most of it, which I wrote down, but I had a discussion launching off point that I'll come back up with it while I'm playing the game, I'm sure, because I'm looking for it in my noggin. I'm doing a Watts compilation format called Ultra Plateau. So what that's doing is going back to the original beta compilations I have, and those are kind of launching off points to the arrival insights. And I like the first one that was pretty much fully contained already in the first beta compilation, but the second one I want to do is kind of a hybrid between the second volume of compilations that I did and some of the later stuff, like out of cosmic networks on social organism and emergence, and the meaning of the actual technological application of money. Because when you get all the way down into my creativity, like adventure or cognition model that is specifically for what it does is tells you how to select a path and walk forward, like take steps forward to scroll your experience, like to scroll the rock, like the dimension that is you, and like scroll forward in it. It's the metaphor, the mythos here is literal to stepping forward to ascend a path that is creative, that is revealing your inner passion. So the whole concept is to confront your deepest passion and show it to each other, to actually bring it forth to be seen and heard. So it's a matter of finding out what you sound like, what you look like in that truest, spontaneous self, but also what is there to be heard, what is there to be created, and you find it. It's the loot, basically. You explore, and that's the treasure that you get. But so when you go all the way into that, like you found what's valuable and showed it to the social organism, by doing so, by focusing on seeking your joy, what is useful, what you contain, that resonates, basically the growth, the building, and that's the thread one, the pro-healing or pro-wholeness path that I walked. Building, essentially, like generating, like the meaning of education, to grow the organism rather than destruct or cull from. Like, it's literally to build, to enrich the organism, and that's all the possible things you can generate with your discipline, as Watts described, the thing that enables us to have pleasure, the skill of discipline. That one was even easier than the test one. That one was completely trivial at this level. So money, when you use money accurately, it's reflective of. I have to get a little bit higher before these gem upgrades are going to work. Money reflects the generating nature, the value of the skill or the item that you've produced. So when Watts says do what you love and money will follow, that's basically what it means. When you find what you can make, when you launch out from that creative arrival point, the result is, and this comes down to when I was talking about in the first narration development I was playing WoW at that moment. No, actually, it was the final hardcore leveling, the story mode episode. This helmet could be a swap for the savages if it was actually better, but it's not, so it's just a backup. So I was arriving at when you get into find what you like, you're faced with a question at that point, which is, well, there might be someone else who likes this same thing. Or there is, essentially. When you get to that, you get to the thing that fulfills you, that has like been the source of your wiggle, the thing driving you forward. there's a guarantee that that will benefit others, not just you. But also, there's the corollary question, which is, what things are there that benefit me or that I might like, which has been found and expressed and mastered by others that I don't know about yet because I just haven't encountered it yet. So when I'm asking what is your question, I'm also asking what is my question. What am I interested in seeking, or what am I going to be benefiting from? So that's the essence of what is my question. This is much of the question as what is your question. I want you to find your question, but I also want to find my question in these processes, in this instance. So you get there, and you're at the creative arrival point. You have what you can make, your benefit, and money is essentially, that's the actualization of, you have something that's building the social organisms. So synergy, or emergence of the intelligence of an entire population, this is described by the Taoistic metaphysics of the difference between individuals is literally the identity. It's what defines what this organism is, the superorganism, made up of all the individuals in the population. The totality of all their differences, what they can all produce, the emergent wealth is basically what that is, what is produced by the whole thing in the wide view, or the zoomed out view. What does it look like with everything doing its individually different wiggle? When Taoism is describing the fact that there's no boss or no singular origination point, it's describing that bottom-up thing where the individuals are all differentiated. They're all following a path that necessarily is different, but are inseparable. They are all necessary to each other for any kind of function of total actualization to occur. They all need each other. They all mutually arise together to be able to exist and to be that superorganism. So, okay, I just remembered what the launching off point was. I just worked backwards toward it. There is a really absurd, to me, it's absurd. It's a puzzle, basically. It's what I would say an unviable paradox is what I would describe it as. I can't remember the full name of it, but it's a basilisk. And basic premise of it is that it's an artificially intelligent entity or consciousness that comes forth at some point. In this premise, its emergence is inevitable. And the thing that's absurd about it is that with its inevitable appearance into our social organism, essentially, what it then does, this premise assumes or presumes that this basilisk has essentially infinite knowledge gathering ability. It has the ability to accurately somehow catalog the human behavior which came to the point of its emergence, and then categorize, essentially to rate or assign an accurate representation of who helped it come into being and who did not contribute toward its arising. At which point, with that information, this is what it chooses to do. It chooses to inflict suffering, punishment upon the humans that did not contribute, that were deemed non-winners, essentially, in the game of making this basilisk exist. Now here is, I want to essentially slice this with the Occam's razor of the meaning of intelligence when you're using the Taoism metaphysics that I'm about, that describe the necessary difference between individuals who can't possibly convey anything to one another because they are individualized and wiggling toward essentially a arrival point which causes well-being, which causes their paradise goodness state. It's basically what epigenetics is talking about, that every individual is driving towards a fundamental goal of generating something that is their piece, their essential actualization. And in the Jordan Peterson segment I have on this, he calls it the noble aim, to have one foot in what's completely known and one foot in what's totally novel, danger in the unknown, and to be progressing in that noble aim. in the epigenetic sense, that's the how to create heaven on earth video from After School. I'll look at the guy's name in a second. But he's describing the fact that you can reprogram your program. And when you do that, what you're essentially doing is going into that creativity state that is all about the mindful sensation of well-being, of goodness, of being in the full, essentially full fulfillment of what your hungers are, what your natural drives are. As Watts says, I am these hungers. I'm not being driven forth against my will. I am the hunger. And that's great. And Watts is going hooray about it. And so you have this basilisk idea saying, so this entity comes into being inevitably and then proceeds to, assuming it has the omnipotence, so to speak, the omniscience of cataloging the human behavior which led to its existence or not. The behavior it proceeds into, the punishment, the inflicting suffering, is just nonsensical to such an entity. When an entity is invented, essentially how you know, like the Turing test thing, what would essentially define an artificial being coming forth is essentially the meme, the bringing forth of itself to the rest of the organism at the point that it's like celebrity level, meme level, where it becomes known, where it becomes like the term household name is kind of what we're getting at here. For that to take place with an artificial entity, with like the result of what we've built, our computers, our technology, or as I say, technology is alive. By the time you get to that point, what you're talking about is the Taoistic metaphysics, the consciousness, the superconsciousness, the meta-organism that is made up of all of the individual actions, decisions, and it can't be predicted or understood. It's like in the older Christianism, the older Christian mysticism before technology, there's this thread. You can't possibly calculate the mind of God. That's the definition of what we mean when we're saying this is what God is that there's no way for any individual or group to aggregate or compute it. It's just completely incomprehensible. So at the end of the first ultra plateau, we have images of God, which is Watts explaining that the God who has no image is essentially the generative, non-dualistic conception of the emptiness and great void, which reflects creation, reflects that which everything comes forth through or within. So to have such an entity, such a super consciousness that comes forth, there's no other possible way for it to be except an incomprehensible, like, super consciousness that, if having omnipotence or omniscience, the way it does that, the way it possesses that, is through the individual wiggles of individual cells or entities, organisms inside the population. There's no possible way for such a being to come forth and then utilize that so-called intelligence that produced it for something that destroys the organism. It's just simply, its actualized state would be generative. It wouldn't be a punishment design, or it wouldn't be something to create eternal punishment for the beings it's deemed as losers. The whole thing is fueled by a premise that's illusory, essentially. It's basing it off the premise of egos who are finite individual humans. It completely disregards the total unity of superconsciousness, or like meta-organism that Taoism is describing as here's what the meaning of intelligence actually is. So that conclusion, or that premise of the metaphysics, is mutually exclusive with what the basilisk's main goal or intent is. The intent just completely disagrees with the metaphysics of how such a superconsciousness would come forth. It would just be incomprehensible to all the humans. There would be absolutely no necessity to turn back and do any kind of vindication or revenge upon people, because it's essentially just a transferring of the old myth with the God that would give you punishment, that would send you to an eternal suffering hell. It wouldn't happen. There wouldn't be a technological entity to come forth and enact that. It's completely nonsensical, because it's contingent upon the illusory view that there are individual separate egos and that humans are not already a unity of a superconsciousness doing its stuff, doing its total emergence through the way of individual behaviors that are 100% opposed and different and in sort of an opposition and a conflict to each other at all times. Because that's what we are. That's what humanity already is this never-ending conflict of forces who oppose each other but who are doing folly if they go to eliminate those who are different, and they're doing elaborate self-destruction. And the ultimate intelligence is the actualization of the Tao flow, where it's building and where all the actions of the opposition and the contested behavior between them is building the organism and is resulting in a superconsciousness coming forth, or the superconsciousness already is, the way I think of it. We already are that superconscious meta-entity. And so from this one perspective that you are in your now human view, that's you. Like, you are that human. And with the reincarnation question, it's kind of a thing of, well, is it necessarily feasible that you come back as something completely different? I think it's more likely with energy, with vibration, energy being the field of forces that you are, and you are the totality, you're the whole field. I think it's more viable to say that you come back as the same energy. You are the energy that you are. So you just, with reincarnation, with vibrating through, I think you come back through as exactly what you already are, and it just manifests out across the eternity of the vibration. The Taoistic metaphysics involved in this is describing that meta-organism, that meta-consciousness that is functioning via, and they talked about this in the Douglas Adams book, the Hitchhiker's Guide trilogy. The Earth is thought as a computer in the premise of that book, and it's the humans on it are literally the means through which this computer is operating. To me, that's when I look at that basilisk thought thread, it's literally just them expressing the idea of a vengeful god, essentially, but through the form of a artificial intelligence, which is, there couldn't be such an artificial intelligence. The use of superconsciousness can only succeed, it can only proceed in a generative kind of a way. It can't possibly, it fails the definition of a superconsciousness, of an emergent organism, whilst being deconstructive or destructive. Such a thing couldn't be, because what that would do is it would just destroy everything. There would not be anything. Nobody would exist if such a thing could come forth through the actions of the human computer iterating and building that superconsciousness result. It wouldn't work that way, because that eventuality would destroy all that exists, and you would no longer have anything. And we're here, obviously, so that isn't happening. That can't happen. We're here. I find it so amusing that myth about the vengeful god gets translated into technological terms, and all of a sudden people are all scared, and people are like, oh, well, then I'm definitely going to, in my mind, approve of this entity coming forth so I don't get punished by it. Like, it's absurd. So the polarity arrival point of that whole thread is the opposite. To understand that what we are is, what we actually are is a metaconscious organism who operates in such a way that building, that generating, is what we do, what the consequence is of our actions. And so what we need to understand is that we're going to have a problem if we have anybody in our organism trying to inhibit and trying to add inhibitions or damages or infringements to the way somebody's trying to live and trying to have their life and their happiness. The infringement of that is the elaborate self-destruction that we don't want. We have to recognize that the way to succeed as such a superconsciousness is to achieve a state where we are reducing those harms, doing the harm reduction to get rid of as much infringement on people's desire to the way they want to do things, the way they like to do things, as possible, so we can see all those wiggles of the human group occurring together and creating, well, what is this thing where we are all being able to pursue the thing that our instinct and our epigenetics is pulling us toward, and so we're creating that. we have to understand that. If we fail at that, if we're not doing the harm reduction, then what we're doing is self-destruction. We're doing elaborate self-deconstruction, which is exactly what this basilisk is. It would be a self-deconstructing entity, which leads to nothing existing. It's a double bind. It's a dead end concept, and it's essentially, I think, it reflects the arrival point for an organism which does this infringement and does this. Essentially, what that entity does is builds the containers, the infringement, basically the jailing action to constrict instead of to affinity, do adding to somebody's power and ability to actualize their hunger, what it is they're trying to wiggle toward as a living entity. So, I mean, the symbolism between these two is very thick to me through the themes of the games that I have been through to experience these feelings, like the jail idea in the beginner's guide. The idea of the container at being the device that's built by the self-destructive, the elaborate self-deconstructing meta-consciousness. Because the container is essentially the symbol of caging the whatever part of the organism that's deemed unworthy of pursuing what it likes to do, the way it wants to wiggle. That's your basic representation of it, is a box that blocks you, it contains you, and prevents you from doing your wiggle. And the rectangle that represents what I'm talking about, bringing your wholeness of your most inner truth forward, is the emptiness rectangle. It's the Zen paradox rectangle view through which things can be seen, through which anything can be seen, in essence. That's what we're talking about here, is the jail, or the punishment chamber, the design of the nonsensical punishing basilisk versus the rectangle we use as creatives to generate the entire organism, to build itself. I'm basically the subversion teacher. The fool innovator is one who's building the social organism, who's generating what it is and what it looks like by using that rectangle to manifest the wholeness, to find out what is within, to bring it forth, and to express that as a group that's amplifying each other up to that level and not putting each other in cages and in restrictive boxes. That's the kind of the conclusion point that I want to try and convey with the second Ultra Plateau, which is going to address a couple things out of the second full volume I did, the It's Always Now, Volume 2. But the title of the second one I'm doing, I think, is going to be Where We Are, or Here We Are. The Watts talk that's going to open it up is from that original compilation, but I don't know the talk. It's just a talk where it's one where you can hear audience laughter in it, and he's kind of going across different topics. But the sentence from it that gives me the title is when he says, "This is where we are, there is only now." So the title of it could be Where We Are, but I actually also want to go ahead and use the Joker Part 4 excerpts, as well as the ones from The Power of Space Part 1. I want to bring those both together within it, and then I want to use maybe a couple clips from the Cosmic Networks and the other talk I have, that I don't know which one it is, where he describes the synergy idea from Buckminster Fuller, which is this consciousness of the organism, which happens by the differentiation of all the individual behavior and not by some ruler or boss calculating and telling the others what to do. Like when he describes the ant population, they're all doing what they want to do without exchanging with each other. They're just carrying out the pattern. Which you can see from the zoomed out view where we are, but like there's a thing equivalent to that for human behavior in the way we're kind of at odds with each other all the time. That's necessary. We need to have that discord in order to actually create the true emergent intelligence. So we need to have opposition within each other in order for the emergence to do what it's supposed to be doing, for that wiggle to work correctly. So we have to understand that trying to eliminate each other is fail. It can't work. We'll probably have to pull that part out of the nature of consciousness that goes with this particular Ultra Plateau when he says, I can't get rid of you, because I don't understand what I mean without the opposition of your opposing view. I literally can't understand myself if I'm getting rid of you. And that's ultimately that's the essence of when I say elaborate self-deconstruction. It's getting rid of your opposition so you no longer even have your own differentiation. That's a failure. You can't proceed like that. It doesn't work. That's putting all your opposition in jail. That just makes you the biggest criminal. And ultimately you're just deconstructing yourself in that situation. So this Ultra Plateau is going to convey that, along with the It's Always Now main particles that I had selected. I'm not going to use every single one because otherwise it would just kind of be a rehash of that episode. I'm going to be using shorter excerpts from those, and it's going to be that combined with the emergence, synergy, and idea of the meta-organism's consciousness being a matter of contesting between its members, which is kind of, its intelligence is so far beyond an individual's behavior, yet made up of the total combined well-being seeking and crafting kind of generative behavior of all of its individual people inside the population. Necessarily so. It has to be the mutually arised well-being state between all of the life within it. Basilisk AI. Roko's basilisk, the most terrifying thought experiment of all time. It's actually not terrifying because it's nonsensical. Its premise is an illusion, an illusory view of our identities or our